I mean, I was as surprised as you guys probably were. I mean, I've seen those sort of manoeuvres before on simulator games and in go-karting, but never in Formula One. Ultimately, we came home in P4 and he came home in P10, so I don't really know what was going through his mind. It felt deliberate in the moment. So, yeah, it was a bit surprising.
Are you surprised it was only a 10-second penalty? Because there are options for a black flag and other penalties.
That's not really my place to say, to be honest. Right now, I'm not even going to give it any thought because we've got our own problems to deal with, which is trying to make our car go faster. We were sort of destined to finish P4 today, probably ahead of Charles and behind Max. Obviously, the safety car at the end to shuffle things up. But it's down to the stewards to decide if it was deliberate or not. But obviously, you know, Max is such an amazing driver, and so many people look up to him. It's just a shame something like that continues to occur. It just seems totally unnecessary, and it never seems to benefit himself. So, yeah.
I think that's the point. He makes those incredible moves like he does in Imola, and then he gets frustrated, as we hear him being told on the radio, to give the place back to you. And we see something like that then takes away from that fantastic driving. He was told to give it back, and he was angry on the radio. I'm not saying it was intentional. I've never raced like that, so I have no idea. But to people watching, it takes the shine off what can be brilliant performances. So you're GPDA chairman. Can you guys talk? What can you do?
I mean, you know, I'm too close to give my opinion on behalf of the drivers, but you know, you see it was like in Austin last year, some of the best moves ever, and then you go to Mexico and sort of lets himself down a bit, and then you go to Imola, one of the best moves that we've all seen in a long time, and then this happens. So, as I said, it cost him and his team a lot of points, and you know, Charles and I actually dropped off like a stone on those last two laps. He probably could have came back to fight for the podium. So, as I said, I'm not going to lose sleep. We've got our own problems to deal with, and that's making our car go faster.
Hi Max, I imagine you know my first question. Was the move on George intentional? My first question has to be, was the move on George intentional when you turned in?
Does it matter?
I think so, to people watching.
Yeah? Okay. That's great. I mean, I prefer to speak about the race than just one single moment.
The moment itself got you a 10-second penalty though, and that pushes you back down to 10th, so it affects your driver's title hopes this year.
If there are any. So I think we are way too slow anyway to fight for the title. I think that was clear again today. We tried to do a 3-stop, and I think it was quite good. It was quite racy, but we also needed it because we had actually quite a bit of degradation on the tires. So I think that was good. Unfortunately, then of course the safety car came out at the end, and we basically ran out of tires to use, and the hard tire was clearly not the right tire. I mean, when you only have 6 laps to go, everyone can go flat out, and I was severely grip limited on the hard.
Just before that moment, it was like, would you rather be a sitting duck in third or a sitting duck in first had you stayed out for the safety car or not pitted when you did and just tried to cling on to those tires?
Of course, afterwards, I mean, we have to look at it again. Of course, new tires, or at least fresh tires, they do make quite a bit of a difference as well. So I think no one really expected maybe that the hard tire was so poor. But when it was only 6 laps, maybe it would have been better to stay out, yes. But that's, of course, a bit easier to say right now.
And just finally for me, leading up to the end of the race there, you were saying in the car that the ride is completely broken. You were unhappy about Lawson and Behrman's tussle in front of you, and then on the radio when GP came on and said, you know, you need to give the place back, there was a lot of frustration going on in the car. Is that what resulted in the move at the end of the race? Is that where it came from? Because you pull off something like the move in Imola, and we all see what an incredible driver you are. And it's horrible to see that shine taken off.
Is it?
With a comment about that. I think so, for fans and for kids watching, I think so.
Yeah? Okay, well, that's your opinion.
Yeah?
Yeah. We leave it there.
All right, thanks, Max.
Did you know that Max Verstappen could have been disqualified for a maneuver that many are calling deliberate? What seemed like a simple defensive move ended in a scandal that divided F1. Comment below. Do you think Verstappen did it on purpose? Is Red Bull losing control in the middle of the season? In this video, we'll break down everything that happened at the 2025 Spanish GP, from the clash between Verstappen and Russell to what could happen next for Red Bull, Mercedes, and the championship. To understand what happened on the final lap of the 2025 Spanish Grand Prix, we must step back a bit and analyze in detail the context in which Red Bull arrived at this race. After a start to the season in which they dominated relatively comfortably, problems began to appear. And they weren't minor. On circuits with slow corners and difficult traction zones, as occurred in Monaco, the RB21 began to show serious limitations. Instead of being corrected, these defects became more evident in Barcelona. What was supposed to be a confidence-building event ended up exposing the structural weaknesses of a car that no longer commands the respect it once did. Red Bull went all in. They arrived at the Circuit de Barcelona-Catalunya with a series of important updates that had been announced at Imola. The objective was clear: to regain the lost advantage over McLaren and Ferrari. Part of that strategy included a new front wing, designed to improve the car's high-speed stability and compensate for the deficit they were experiencing in slow corners. The recent technical directive TD018, which regulates the use of flexible wings, was also expected to negatively impact other teams more reliant on this technology. Christian Horner was optimistic in his pre-race statements, suggesting that this directive could alter the competitive balance. However, in practice, little changed. The reality was different. Although the new wing showed occasional improvements, especially at turn 9, where the RB21 managed to regain some balance, the slow sectors continued to be a nightmare. This lack of downforce in tight sections allowed Ferrari and McLaren to remain superior in race conditions. Furthermore, tire degradation became an insurmountable obstacle. Red Bull was forced to implement a 3-stop strategy, yet still failed to maintain the pace of the leaders. A visibly frustrated Max Verstappen held nothing back in his post-race interview. "We're too slow to fight for the title." A statement that not only reveals the technical condition of the car, but also the mental strain on his lead driver. That began to become visible even before the race reached its climax. During several passages of the broadcast, Verstappen could be heard questioning the team's decisions, discussing tire choices, and expressing his discomfort with the car's behavior. The situation worsened further with the safety car's deployment in the closing laps. While other teams fitted medium tires for the final laps, Verstappen stuck with used hard tires. It was a move that, in plain sight, left him exposed. In his own words, "No grip and an easy target." A phrase that sums up the helplessness of a driver accustomed to dominating, but who on this occasion felt completely vulnerable. And it wasn't just a matter of tires. The RB21's race pace was inconsistent from the start. Even on long runs, where they usually excelled, the data showed that the car was struggling to maintain the right tire temperature. This instability forced improvisation on the fly and created a perfect scenario for miscommunication, internal tension, and, eventually, unbridled frustration. Verstappen was under pressure to salvage the weekend, to drag his team toward a podium finish that was becoming increasingly unlikely. And amidst this context, the chaos of the final lap was merely the end of a storm that had already been brewing. With this clear picture, it's impossible to analyze what happened between Verstappen and Russell as an isolated incident. It was a reflection of an accumulated situation, of a driver on the edge, and of a team that no longer has the answers it used to have. What seemed like just another incident ended up laden with symbolism, pent-up frustrations, and consequences that go far beyond a simple penalty. The most tense moment of the Spanish Grand Prix came at the very end, just after the safety car restart. The track compressed, the margins disappeared, and the pressure reached its peak. Max Verstappen was under pressure from Charles Leclerc, who had already overtaken him. Red Bull opted not to take any risks in the pits, leaving Verstappen out on visibly worn hard tires while his direct rivals were on fresher compounds. This decision, made at a key moment, put him in an extremely vulnerable position. The maneuver took place in one of the fastest sections of the circuit, right under braking for turn 1, where most overtaking moves are usually decided by millimeters. Verstappen tried to defend his position by closing the gap to the inside, but Russell had already compromised his line. In an instant, the Red Bull went off the track, but instead of yielding as is usually required in such situations, Verstappen returned to the asphalt without lifting his foot and aggressively swung his steering wheel into the side of the Mercedes. That's when contact occurred. It wasn't a minor collision. The impact was strong enough to damage the underbody of both cars and ruin Russell's hopes of fighting for the podium. The initial reaction on the track was one of confusion. Russell didn't understand what had happened. His communication with the Mercedes pit wall was immediate and clearly expressed in disbelief. "Did he do that on purpose?" was one of the phrases most repeated later on social media. Verstappen, for his part, offered no immediate apology or seemed to admit fault. Even when the FIA forced him to give up his position, he did so with noticeable reluctance. The penalty came shortly after, 10 seconds for causing an avoidable collision. But the discussion didn't end there. From a technical standpoint, the subsequent analysis was revealing. Red Bull's telemetry data showed that Verstappen's steering angle remained constant throughout the maneuver, indicating that it wasn't a miscalculation due to loss of traction or understeer, but rather a conscious decision to maintain the inside trajectory, despite having room to avoid contact. This data fueled the theory that the maneuver was deliberate, motivated more by frustration than tactics. Russell's post-race comments were cautious but firm. He said he had seen such maneuvers in simulators, but that he didn't expect anything like this in a real race. A clever way of implying that, in his opinion, Verstappen's actions were outside the bounds of fair competition. In the world of Formula One, where every action is scrutinized down to the last detail, these types of incidents do not go unnoticed. Comparisons immediately arose with other controversial situations from the past, such as the famous collision between Michael Schumacher and Jacques Villeneuve at Jerez in 1997. In both cases, it involved a driver fiercely defending a position that was no longer defensible, using contact as a last resort. But there's a crucial difference. Unlike Schumacher back then, Verstappen wasn't fighting for a championship, which exacerbates the perception that his move wasn't strategic but emotional. And that's precisely what most worries those closely following the Dutch driver's development. Because what we saw wasn't just a mistake on the track. It was a reaction charged with tension, discontent, and mounting pressure from a car that no longer performs as it once did, and from a championship position that's beginning to slip away. And that pressure isn't just affecting Verstappen, it's beginning to filter through to the entire Red Bull structure. What happened on the track between Max Verstappen and George Russell didn't end with a checkered flag. It was just the beginning of a wave of reactions that revealed the enormous emotional burden carried by the protagonists and the teams. The post-race statements were marked by latent tension. Russell, when interviewed, avoided openly blaming Verstappen, but his every word was precisely measured. His tone was diplomatic, but his discomfort was evident. "It's not the kind of maneuver you expect at this level," he said cautiously. The phrase was enough for the media and fans to interpret that. Although he didn't say it directly, his message pointed to unsportsmanlike conduct on the part of the Red Bull driver. On the other side of the garage, Verstappen not only didn't apologize, but his response was even more disconcerting. When asked about the incident, his only reaction was a rhetorical question laced with indifference. Does it matter? That word, spoken with resignation or defiance depending on how you interpret it, sent shockwaves through the paddock. It wasn't just the maneuver that was being debated, it was his attitude. Many analysts interpreted that phrase as a symptom of emotional exhaustion, as a clear sign that Max is losing his composure at a time when his team most needs mental clarity and leadership. The reactions weren't limited to the main protagonists. Veteran paddock figures, like Nico Hülkenberg, were blunt. The German driver was one of the few who didn't hold back. That was a black flag. What Max did damages the image of the sport. His words echoed across forums, opinion columns, and social media. The controversy quickly escalated. On platforms like RaceFans, Twitter, and Reddit, the fan community was divided into opposing camps. Some defended the maneuver as part of Verstappen's combative nature, even calling it pure spectacle, while others called it a clear display of immaturity and lack of emotional control. What's interesting is at this time, even within Red Bull, the situation didn't go unnoticed. Internal tension has been felt within the team for weeks. Uneven results, doubts about the technical direction, and growing external pressure are taking their toll on the team's dynamic. Verstappen, who used to be the anchor of stability and performance, is now generating noise. His relationship with the engineers and strategists seems more strained, and every radio communication reflects a drier, less cooperative tone. The perfect synchronicity that led them to dominate previous seasons is no longer there. And the most worrying thing is that this tension no longer stays behind closed doors. It's perceptible in the air. It seeps into every press conference. It's being talked about in the paddock corridors. Cameras captured shifty glances at the Red Bull wall, awkward silences, and gestures that speak volumes without a single word being spoken. Rumors of internal burnout are beginning to gather steam. And when that happens in a team that relies so heavily on a single driver, the consequences can be unpredictable. All of this leads us to a key question. How long can this situation continue without it exploding completely? Formula One is as emotional as it is technical, and when a team begins to fracture from within, on-track performance suffers. What happened between Verstappen and Russell isn't just an isolated incident. It's a symptom of something deeper already happening within Red Bull. And when emotions run high, decisions become more impulsive, mistakes become more costly, and relationships become more fragile. Red Bull's technical situation can't be understood solely by results. At first glance, they're still fighting for the top positions, continuing to score points. But if you look closely, the team is going through a silent, deep, and structural crisis. What began as a small loss of performance on certain tracks has become a worrying pattern. The RB21, which in the first races seemed a solid evolution of its successful predecessor, has begun to show cracks that even the most ambitious updates have failed to patch. And that, in modern Formula One, can mean an accelerated decline. The implementation of Technical Directive TD018, designed to limit wing flexibility, affected several teams, but Red Bull expected its rivals to be the hardest hit. The surprise was that the technical impact didn't weaken McLaren or Ferrari as expected, but instead exposed a vulnerability of its own. The new parts introduced in Spain, such as the more aggressive front wing and certain modifications to the lower aerodynamic flow, did not generate the expected gains. Instead of making clear progress, the team found itself with a car that was more difficult to balance, more unpredictable in variable track conditions, and increasingly demanding in tire management. The sight of Verstappen struggling to maintain the correct temperature on his hard tires during the final laps was no exception. It confirmed a trend. But the most worrying aspect isn't the occasional strategy error or excessive wear during a session. What's alarming is that Red Bull is beginning to rely almost exclusively on Verstappen's talent to remain competitive. This dependence, which years ago was presented as a strength, is now revealed as a dangerous weakness. Every weekend, cameras and microphones capture Max demanding more, questioning decisions, pressuring the team to improve a car that doesn't perform as he expects. And although he's been able to push the team forward so far, the level of tension he's building is becoming unsustainable. There's no margin for error, no room for relaxation, and that wears down even the most solid driver. The situation worsens when you notice that the car's technical development falls almost exclusively on Max. And they know it. That's why, in the last few hours, the team has announced the introduction of a new diffuser for the next round at Silverstone. A part that could be key to recovering downforce and balance, but whose effectiveness will depend entirely on how it interacts with the conditions imposed by the technical team. The problem is that there are no guarantees. If this update doesn't work as expected, they will not only lose ground in the standings, but they could also lose the psychological leadership they have maintained for years in the paddock. McLaren and Mercedes know this, and Ferrari, although somewhat more inconsistent, has shown that it can fight when conditions are favorable. Red Bull, for the first time in a long time, no longer inspires fear. It no longer sets the pace. And if they fail to make a statement in the next two races, they risk being sucked into a battle that, until recently, seemed beyond their control. This is the real challenge for Red Bull. It's not just about on-track performance. It's about regaining control of the narrative, proving they are still a dominant team, and sending a clear message to the rest of the field. They are not finished yet. But to do that, they need immediate results. And above all, they need to calm the internal waters before the emotional and technical strain ends up fracturing the structure. But while Red Bull tries to rebuild itself, there is another team that is doing things well, step by step, without fanfare but with firm technical direction. Mercedes seems to be finding a coherent line of development, and George Russell is capitalizing on that progress with maturity and consistency. While Red Bull struggles to stay afloat, something different is brewing at Mercedes. They may not be winning races every weekend, but the atmosphere at Brackley exudes a different feeling: order, direction, and conviction. What just a couple of months ago seemed like another stagnant year is now beginning to take shape as a coherent rebuilding process. The latest technical updates have begun to show clear signs of progress, and that progress isn't just mechanical but also human. George Russell, quietly and without drawing attention to himself with high-sounding declarations, is building something more important than a good season. He is cementing his role as team leader. At the Spanish Grand Prix, Mercedes introduced a new aerodynamic floor, a key component that complemented the front wing introduced in Canada. The goal was to optimize airflow under the car and stabilize its handling in medium and high-speed corners. And it worked. Although the W15 is still not the fastest car, the leap in consistency was evident. Russell was competitive throughout the weekend, especially on long runs, where the car was able to maintain pace without suffering the same kind of degradation that so affected Red Bull. Toto Wolff didn't hesitate to describe this development as the beginning of a new era, suggesting that they have finally found solid technical direction on which to build. The most interesting thing is how Russell responded to this scenario. His performance was solid, but what stands out most is his emotional intelligence. Unlike in other garages, George doesn't transmit nervousness or tension. His way of communicating with the wall is clear, direct, but always constructive. During the incident with Verstappen, he remained calm even when he could have easily exploded. Instead, he chose to position himself as a role model. That restraint, that maturity, speaks louder than any radio message. He's understanding that leading a team like Mercedes requires more than speed. It requires character. And he's showing it. At the same time, internal comparisons with Lewis Hamilton are becoming inevitable. In Spain, Hamilton failed to keep up with Leclerc's pace, nor did he find the performance necessary to trouble his direct rivals. Although he still enjoys the team's absolute respect, his role is beginning to fade in the face of Russell's gradual rise. The difference is no longer just one of specific results, but of energy. While Lewis seems worn out, perhaps more focused on what comes after F1, Russell represents the immediate future. He's the one who listens, tests, corrects, and returns to the track with a constructor's mentality. And in a team like Mercedes, that kind of attitude carries much more weight than an isolated fast lap. On the technical side, the W15 still has work to do. Tire thermal management remains its main weakness, especially in variable conditions. But if they can resolve that issue, the projections are promising. Paddock analysts are already beginning to believe that Mercedes has a real chance of overtaking Ferrari in the fight for the constructors' runner-up spot. And if that happens, it would be a tremendous psychological blow for the Italians, but also a powerful vindication for a team that many considered lost just a few months ago. Russell, for his part, is showing that he can handle that responsibility. He doesn't need cameras or headlines to lead. He's doing it from within, with consistency, with a professional attitude. And that, in the long run, often makes the difference between good drivers and champions. Given this scenario, it's no longer just a matter of looking at which team has the fastest car, but rather understanding how the hierarchies within the paddock are being reconfigured. Red Bull's dominance is no longer undisputed. Mercedes's is no longer a transition without direction. And what we saw in Spain wasn't an isolated incident, but rather a symptom of a deeper change that's beginning to shake things up.